Have you ever given up on something that should have changed your life? Don't tell me no, because most people watching this video have already started something with all their might, with that feeling that this time it was going to be different. And then they stopped. An academy, a college, a business, a dream. And the worst part isn't giving up. The worst part is knowing that you'll probably give up again and again and again, until you start to believe that this is who you are. But know this problem is more common than you imagine, and it's not a sign of weakness. There's a precise explanation with over 1,000 years of history for why modern people give up so easily. And there's also a code used by warriors who chose death over abandoning what they had sworn to defend that can change that forever. This is the video you've needed to watch for years. There is a phenomenon called the fresh start effect. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania have discovered that people are more likely to start new habits on symbolic dates. The beginning of the week, the beginning of the month, the new year, the famous "I'll start on Monday." But there's a detail that these same researchers found. 92% of people who start something new at the beginning of the year give up before February. 92. This means that for every 100 people who start something with hope on January 1st, only 8 make it to the second month, 8. Now ask me a question. Have you ever stopped to think about how many times you've been part of that statistic? How many gym memberships have you paid for without ever setting foot in? How many courses have you bought without finishing? How many projects have you started in March because "I'll start on Monday" didn't work in January, and it didn't work in February either? There is something profoundly wrong with the way modernity has taught us to deal with commitment. And the most honest answer to that didn't come from a neuroscientist nor a productivity coach. It came from a warrior who lived in 16th century Japan. But before I tell you about him, let me introduce you to Arthur. Chapter 1. The Man Who Never Ended. Arthur was 25 years old and had a resume that seemed like a joke. It wasn't a resume of experiences. It was a resume of beginnings. A long, shameful list of things he had started and abandoned before getting anywhere. He had tried being a salesman. It worked for 2 months. Then he realized that selling wasn't for him. He had opened a shop. He closed it after 90 days because the competition was fierce and the market was tough, and because Arthur had given up. He entered law school. He dropped out in his 3rd semester. He then enrolled in psychology, thinking the problem was the choice of major. He dropped out in his 2nd semester. The problem clearly wasn't the major. He studied investments intensely for 3 months, read books, made spreadsheets, watched dozens of hours of content, and then he stopped. Because he wasn't seeing results fast enough, because it was too complicated, because the next idea was already knocking on his head. Arthur's life was a series of first chapters without a second chapter. And the people around him knew it. Sometimes they spoke to his face. Sometimes they spoke behind his back, but he heard it anyway. Arthur won't make it. He starts everything enthusiastically, but he waits. He soon gives up. You'll never amount to anything, son. You never finish what you start. You know what's worse than people saying that? It's looking back and realizing they were right. Arthur had become exactly what they said he was, because he had never understood what truly made someone keep going when everything inside them screamed to stop. And that night, at 25, alone in the small apartment he struggled to rent, Arthur reached a place few people dare to admit. He no longer trusted himself. There was no turning back. The evidence was too clear. Chapter 2. The Mistake Arthur Made Every Day. Arthur's problem wasn't motivation. It was the opposite. Every time he started something new, the motivation was there, enormous, overflowing. He went to sleep excited, woke up excited, and told people about it excitedly. The energy of a new beginning is one of the most powerful feelings there is. But motivation is a resource that runs out. And when it was over, usually between the 2nd and 4th week, Arthur would be naked, without protection, facing the difficulty and with nothing to confront it, except the desire of the moment, which was at 0. This is where most people give up. Not because the goal changed, not because the path became impossible, but because the feeling of wanting to continue evaporated. And since the decision to continue depended on that feeling of wanting to, without that feeling, there was no decision. Arthur was trapped in a cycle he didn't even know existed, starting driven by emotion, continuing dependent on emotion, stopping when the emotion faded. But there was another problem, perhaps a more subtle one. Arthur chose what to do based on a single question. What will give me the most money? It wasn't the wrong question. It was an incomplete question. Because money is a consequence. It's not a driving force. And every man who has ever tried to wake up at 5 in the morning to work for a consequence knows that the bed is stronger than the financial spreadsheet. He was trying to climb a mountain without knowing why he wanted to reach the top. And when the climb became difficult, when his feet ached and the fog obscured the peak, he stopped. Because he didn't know why he was climbing. Arthur needed something that modernity no longer teaches. He needed a code. Chapter 3. The day Arthur met the samurai. It was on a Sunday with nothing special about it. Arthur was online scrolling through videos in that state of mind that mixes boredom and anguish. He had tried to start yet another thing that month. He had stopped again. He was feeling exactly the way you feel when you fail yourself, heavy. He happened to click on a documentary about samurai. He wasn't looking for anything specific. He had no intention whatsoever. It was the kind of thing that happens when you're escaping your own thoughts on the internet at 11 o'clock at night. But something held him back. It wasn't the battles, the aesthetics of the armor, or the beauty of the swords. It was a specific piece of information that appeared in the first half hour of the documentary, information that made Arthur pause the video and stare at the screen for a while without blinking. The samurai had a code called Bushido. And this code wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a set of medieval productivity tips. It was literally the definition of who a samurai was. If he broke the code, he ceased to be a samurai. Not in a metaphorical sense, in a real, absolute sense, without appeal. And Arthur wondered, how can someone who lives by such a code simply give up? The answer was simple. You can't. Not because it's impossible, but because giving up for a samurai wasn't an option within the code. It was like asking a fish why it doesn't climb trees. The question doesn't make sense within the nature of the being. Arthur spent that entire night immersed in the world of samurai, and the more he read, the more he understood that he wasn't looking at a story about medieval Japanese warriors. He was looking in a mirror. Chapter 4. What is Bushido really? Many people have heard of Bushido. Few understand what it really is. It's not a philosophy of war. It's not a combat manual. Bushido, which literally means the way of the warrior, is a moral code of conduct that defined absolutely everything about how a samurai lived. Not just how they fought, how they lived. And it is built upon 7 fundamental pillars. Arthur read about each of them that night, but 3 of them broke something inside him in a way he couldn't ignore. The first was Guy, righteousness, the idea that you act out of duty, not emotion. The samurai didn't ask if he felt like training that day. He didn't wait for motivation to arrive before picking up his sword. He had a duty, and duty didn't negotiate with mood. Arthur read that 3 times. Act out of duty, not emotion. His whole life had been the opposite of that. He started when the excitement was high. He stopped when the excitement faded. Excitement was the pilot. Duty didn't even exist in his vocabulary. The second pillar was courage. And here was something most people misunderstand about courage. Bushido didn't say that the warrior didn't feel fear. Bushido said that the warrior acted even when feeling fear. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to move forward with fear. Arthur thought about all the times he stopped because he wasn't sure, because it was difficult, because the outcome wasn't guaranteed. He hoped the feeling of fear or doubt would pass before he continued, but it never did. And then he stopped. You said that this was exactly the time to continue. The third pillar was Meiyo, honor. And that was the one Arthur got right the most. In Bushido, honor wasn't something internal, private, kept to oneself. It was public, social, and permanent. A samurai who broke his word destroyed who he was, not metaphorically, but literally. He lost the respect of the community, the clan, everyone around him. Meiyo said that real commitment needed weight. It needed real consequences. But what intrigued Arthur most in that study was one man in particular, a samurai unlike any other. Chapter 5. Miyamoto Musashi and the Man Who Never Stopped. If there is a samurai who embodies what it means to never give up, that man is Miyamoto Musashi. And not because he was unbeatable from the start. Quite the opposite. Musashi was born around 1584. He lost his mother as a baby. His father abandoned the family. He was raised by relatives far from everything, without structure, without stability. He wasn't the son of a samurai born into wealth. He was a poor boy, with anger in his heart and a sword in his hand. He fought his first duel at 13 and he won, because he was willing to keep going when the other wasn't. Arthur read that Musashi fought over 60 duels throughout his life, and he didn't lose a single one. More than 60 documented duels, victory in all of them, in a time when losing a duel meant death. But what Arthur found that profoundly changed him wasn't the tally of victories. It was the book Musashi wrote at the age of 60, the Book of 5 Rings, Gorin no Sho. Musashi wrote this book alone in a cave during the last months of his life, knowing he was dying. And in the book he said something that Arthur read aloud in the silence of the apartment. Do not go against the beginning of the path. Do not try to evade the path. Never abandon the path. Musashi wasn't talking about swords. He was talking about who you choose to be, about the line you draw between who you were and who you decided to become. Arthur stared at that sentence for a long time. He had never chosen who to be. He had only tried various things in the hope that one of them would stick. He didn't have a path. He had a series of disconnected attempts, each born from the frustration of the previous one. Musashi had a path, and he never abandoned it. Not when it was difficult, not when it was uncertain, not even when he was dying. Chapter 6. The second concept that Arthur needed to understand. Bushido was the code, but code alone is not enough. Everyone has values they claim to have. Few people have the habits that uphold those values in their daily lives. The gap between what you believe and what you do is precisely where giving up resides. Arthur discovered the second concept a few days later, while continuing his studies, and its name was Shitsuke. Shitsuke is generally translated as discipline or self-discipline, but the translation misses something important. The origin of the word comes from Shitsuke Ito, which means the thread that shapes the fabric before it is sewn, the thread that gives shape before the shape is ready. It's the idea that discipline isn't willpower, it's structure. It's the set of rituals and practices you create not because you feel motivated, but because they exist regardless of how you feel. Arthur understood something that had eluded him his entire life. He confused discipline with motivation. He thought he needed to feel disciplined in order to act in a disciplined way. But the samurai trained with Shitsuke, not because they felt like it, not because they were excited, because it was training time. The ritual existed before the will. And when ritual precedes will ceases to matter. Arthur began to see that all the failures in his life had the same root. He had never built structure. He had built enthusiasm. And enthusiasm without structure is just a beautiful fire that burns for a week and turns to ashes. There is a fascinating study published in the European Journal of Social Psychology, conducted by researcher Philippa Lally, which investigated how long it takes for a behavior to become automatic. The popular answer is 21 days, 3 weeks, and presto, the habit is established. You've heard that somewhere before, for sure. But Lally's study found something completely different. On average, it took participants 66 days for the behavior to become automatic. 66 days, more than 2 months, and the range varied between 18 and 254 days, depending on the behavior and the person. The 21-day myth is exactly that, a myth. And it's a dangerous myth because it makes people give up in week 4 thinking they've failed, when in reality, they were only halfway through the process. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman, in one of his published lectures on neuroplasticity, says that the brain doesn't change all at once. It changes in layers. Each repetition is an instruction to the nervous system that this behavior is relevant enough to be consolidated. and the nervous system, being extremely efficient, only consolidates what appears frequently enough for a long enough time. There's no shortcut to this. Musashi understood this principle instinctively, centuries before neuroscience existed. The daily training of the samurai wasn't about getting strong. It was about telling the body and mind every day, this is the way. This behavior is who we are. Shitsuke was, in practice, what we now call the creation of neural connections through intentional repetition. James Clear, in his bestseller Atomic Habits, says something that resonates directly with Shitsuke. Every action is a vote for the kind of person you want to become. And when you consistently vote over time, your identity changes. You stop having a goal and start being a person. The samurai knew this. They just called it by a different name. Chapter 7. The day Arthur made the strangest decision of his life. 3 weeks into his night studying the samurai, Arthur was sitting in a cafe when he had a thought that seemed completely irrational. He wanted to become a Navy SEAL. It wasn't a gradual epiphany. It was a moment. He was reading about David Goggins, one of the most physically tested men in the world, a former Navy SEAL, an ultra-marathon runner, and Goggins was talking about something Arthur immediately recognized in Bushido. Goggins spoke about not surrendering to discomfort, about finding who you are when everything inside you begs you to stop, about the idea that the mind gives up long before the body reaches its limit. And Arthur realized that this was the same principle, Ginjun Meiyo, the warrior who acts out of duty, who advances despite fear, who does not abandon because abandonment would destroy who he is. But what really shook him was something else. Arthur realized he had spent years trying to figure out what would make him the most money. Sales, investments, colleges with good job prospects. He had tried to build a life based on a consequence, not a purpose. And then he remembered something he had forgotten a long time ago. When he was 11 years old, Arthur watched a documentary about American Special Forces, and he was completely captivated by it. Not by the violence, but by the idea that there were men who trained their entire lives to be the best a human being could be. Men who became unbreakable not because they were born that way, but because they chose to be. He had forgotten that dream somewhere between the failed attempts and the voices of people saying he would never amount to anything. At that cafe, Arthur decided that's exactly what he was going to get, because it was the only thing he could imagine that would make sense to wake up to every day at 4 in the morning to build. For the first time in 25 years, Arthur had a path. Chapter 8. The beginning that was different from all the others. Arthur's training started like any other beginning. The excitement was there. The certainty was there. The plan was there. And Arthur recognized that feeling with a knot in his stomach. It was the same feeling every time, and every time it had ended the same way. But this time he did something different. He stopped before he began. He sat down in front of a blank sheet of paper, and he wrote 3 things. The first question, why this? Not what I want to achieve. Why this specific path made sense for who he wanted to be. He wrote about Goggins, about Musashi, about the 11-year-old boy who dreamed of this and was convinced to forget it. He wrote about Gi, the duty that doesn't compromise with humor. The second part, what will happen when motivation runs out? He wrote specifically about the moments when he would want to give up, the day when training will seem impossible, the week when the thought that it's not for him will hit him, the moment when someone will say it's too late. And for each moment he wrote what he would do, not what he would feel, what he would do. The third thing he wrote was a public commitment. He called his brother, his best friend, his father, even knowing that his father was one of those who always said he would never make it. He told each one, I'm applying to the Navy SEALs. I'm starting training today. I want you to know that. Meiyo, public honor, commitment with real weight. If he gave up now, everyone would know. Chapter 9. Shitsuke in practice. When code became routine. The first week was relatively easy. Arthur knew that would happen. It was always like that. By the second week, his body had really started to complain. The runs were long and painful. The endurance training was humiliating. Arthur discovered he was far less physically fit than he had imagined. Much less. It was in the second week that he began to truly apply Shitsuke. He created fixed rituals. At 4:30 in the morning, the alarm rang, and Arthur learned to do something that seemed too small to matter. Before he could think, before his brain was awake enough to negotiate, he was already up. There was no talking to the pillow. There were no 5 more minutes. His body rose before his mind had a chance to vote against it. This was Shitsuke, the ritual that exists before the will. After 6 weeks, waking up at 4:30 was no longer a battle. It was the time the body woke up. The decision had evaporated because the ritual had replaced it. But then came the 4th week, and it came with a vengeance. It was a Saturday. Arthur hadn't slept well. His ankle had been hurting for 2 days since a bad training session. The rain pattered against the window, and the thought came, silent and familiar, like an old enemy. It doesn't have to be today. Rest. You deserve it. Arthur recognized that thought. It was exactly the same thought that had ended all the other attempts. The same one. With the same words. The same smooth logic. He stood up. He got up because Guy says you act out of duty, not emotion. And duty existed regardless of how he was feeling. That was the most important day in Arthur's journey. Not the day he performed best. The day he chose to continue with nothing, absolutely nothing, pushing him forward except the code. There's a concept in Navy SEAL training that instructors call the 40% rule. The idea is this: when your brain tells you that you've reached your limit, that you can't go on anymore, that you need to stop now, you're using approximately 40% of your real capacity, 40%. The brain sends the stop signal long before the body actually needs to stop. It's a protective mechanism. The nervous system is conservative. It prefers to stop early rather than risk injury. And this rule doesn't just apply to the body. It applies to the whole of life. When you think you can no longer keep that business alive, you're at 40%. When you think you have nothing left to give in a relationship, you're at 40%. When you feel you no longer have the capacity to continue studying, to continue trying, to continue believing, you're at 40%. The samurai had reached this conclusion centuries before the SEALs. Musashi wrote, "It is the mind that must be trained, not the body. Because the body stops when the mind tells it to stop, and the mind tells it to stop too soon. The real training is teaching the mind not to believe that signal before its time." Arthur learned this the hard way. Chapter 10. The fall that almost ended everything. In the 5th month of training, Arthur fell. Not metaphorically. He literally fell during a weighted race, twisted his ankle badly, and heard a pop that wasn't good. Stress fracture in his left ankle. 6 weeks without training. The doctor said this on a Tuesday. Arthur arrived at the apartment, threw the bag on the floor, and stood in the middle of the room for an unspecified amount of time. 6 weeks. Everything he had built up, the consistency, the rituals, the conditioning, 6 weeks of forced pause. And the thought came. But this time it wasn't gentle. It was loud. It was convincing. It was reasonable. "Did you see? It was meant to be this way. You tried. It lasted 5 months, which is longer than any other time, but look what happened. This isn't for you." Arthur couldn't get that thought out for 2 days. On the 3rd day, he picked up the Book of 5 Rings, because he needed something beyond himself. And he reread the sentence he had read that Sunday night, months before. Never abandon the path. Musashi didn't write, "Never abandon the path when everything is going well." He didn't write, "Never abandon when you are healthy and motivated and things are going well." He wrote, "Never." Unconditionally. Arthur picked up his cell phone and called his brother. "I hurt my ankle, but I'm not going to stop. I'm adapting my training to what I can do now." And that was it. 6 weeks working on what I could. Upper body strength, studying military strategy and tactics, mindset. What the body couldn't do, the mind did. When his ankle finally healed, Arthur was behind in terms of physical conditioning, but more prepared in everything else that didn't depend on his physique. And that preparation would matter more than he imagined. Chapter 11. What the samurai knew about identity. There is a moment in the process of applying Bushido and Shitsuke that is difficult to describe. It's the moment when you stop doing things and start being things. Arthur can't pinpoint when it happened. It wasn't a single event. It was a gradual transition that he only perceived retroactively. Sometime between the 5th and 8th month, Arthur stopped waking up early because he was training to be a SEAL. He woke up early because that was the time he woke up. He stopped running because he needed to maintain consistency. He ran because he was the type of person who ran. The goal had become identity. Identity is completely different from purpose. Purpose is something you have. Identity is something you are. And when you are something, you don't decide every day whether you're going to continue being it. You simply are. The samurai understood this in a way that modernity has completely lost. The Bushido Code wasn't a list of goals. It was a definition of character. It was the answer to the question, who are you? Not the answer to, what do you want to achieve? A samurai did not aim to be honored. He was honored. Honor was not a destiny. It was the nature of being. Arthur was becoming that, the version of that made sense for the life he was building. A man who doesn't give up. Not because he's trying not to give up, but because giving up had been removed from the menu of options. Chapter 12. The end of Arthur's story and the beginning of yours. 2 years and 3 months after that Sunday night when Arthur accidentally clicked on a documentary about samurai, he was standing in line in a state that wasn't his own, in front of a facility he had dreamed of entering since he was 11 years old. The Navy SEAL selection process is considered one of the toughest in the world. The dropout rate in the Bud S phase, the basic diver training, is historically 80%. 8 out of 10 candidates who reach that point leave without completing. Arthur knew about that statistic. I knew it was going to be the hardest thing I'd ever done. I knew his path to this point had been longer and more bumpy than that of many other candidates. But he also knew something that many candidates didn't yet know. He knew exactly what the brain does when everything is telling you to stop. He knew because he had lived through it hundreds of times in the previous 2 years. He knew the taste of that thought that says, it's time to stop. He knew the texture of doubt. He knew how exhaustion lies about what you still have. And he knew he had 40% more than he thought he had. The process was brutal in the way only buds can be. The week of hell, the night workouts, the ice-cold water, the less than 4 hours of sleep a day for days on end. Every moment of it was an invitation to quit. There was a bell that candidates could ring at any time if they decided to stop. A bell, and the sound of it was the resignation becoming a reality. Arthur would sometimes hear the bells of other candidates, and every time he heard them, he thought of Musashi in the cave. He also thought of Gi, of Yu, of Meiyo. I thought about the boy he used to be, who always gave up, and he thought about who he had chosen to be. Arthur didn't ring the bell. He completed the Bud S. He completed the training. And on the day he received the SEAL Trident, the insignia that few men in the world wear, he thought of all the people who had said he would never amount to anything. Not with anger, with something different, with gratitude, almost. Because the pressure of those words, the weight of that story of failure, had created the necessary tension for him to finally seek something different. And what he found, on a random Sunday night, had changed everything. It wasn't motivation. It wasn't talent. It wasn't favorable genetics. It was the code. Now I need to be honest with you about something. Arthur's story isn't about becoming a Navy SEAL. You probably don't want to be a SEAL. You probably don't need to be. And that's not what matters here. What matters is what Arthur understood before achieving anything. What he understood was the nature of commitment, and that matters to you regardless of your path. Let's recap what Arthur's journey taught us. First point, motivation isn't the foundation. Motivation is a flame, beautiful, warm, powerful for a moment, but every flame needs fuel to continue, and when the fuel of novelty runs out, the flame goes out. What sustains the long term isn't the emotion of starting, it's the duty to continue. G. You act out of duty, not emotion. Second point, courage is not the absence of fear. It's action despite fear. It's continuing when doubt strikes. It's getting up on a rainy Saturday with a sore ankle and no good feeling pushing you forward. You, moving forward with discomfort. Third point, commitment without weight is just intention. When you only promise to yourself, the cost of abandoning it is zero, and zero cost produces zero result. Make public what you are building. Put honor on the line, Meiyo. But be careful. I'm not telling you to expose yourself on the internet or tell everyone you know about your personal plans. I'm telling you to share them with people you trust. It could be your father, your mother, your husband or wife, a relative, or a trusted friend. Fourth point, discipline is not willpower, it's structure. It's the rituals that exist before the will arrives. It's the alarm that sounds and the body that gets up before the mind has a chance to negotiate. Shitsuke, the thread that shapes the fabric before the form is ready. And fifth point, perhaps the most important of all, identity trumps purpose. When you stop trying to do things and start being the kind of person who does those things, the battle changes in nature. You don't decide every day whether you're going to continue. You simply continue because that's who you are. Arthur didn't become a man who didn't give up because he stopped being weak. He became a man who didn't give up because he chose a code greater than his everyday mood. Musashi wrote the Book of 5 Rings in a cave, knowing he would die. He was over 60 years old, his body worn down by decades of actual combat, and yet he was still teaching. He was still on his path. Because the journey wasn't a destination, it was an identity. And the question that remains, the question that this entire video has been building towards from the beginning, is this. Do you have a path? Or do you just have a series of attempts that don't connect to anything bigger than yourself? Because the difference between those who give up and those who don't isn't strength. It's knowing how to answer that question, and then living by the answer, every day, regardless of how you're feeling. This is the code. This is Bushido. And now it's yours too if you want it. Look, if this video reached you today, it wasn't by chance. Perhaps you are exactly where Arthur was that Sunday night, feeling the weight of everything that began and didn't end. Hearing the voices of the people who said you'll never amount to anything. Or maybe you're already on that path, and this video was the reminder you needed not to stop now. Anyway, I invite you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Every week there's new content here, with the same intention as this one, to help you better understand who you are and who you can become. Leave a like on the video if it reached its intended audience, and comment below, what path have you chosen? What is the one thing that from today onwards you will never abandon? I want to read, and if you enjoyed this video, I invite you to watch one of the ones currently appearing on your screen. These are videos from the channel that discuss Japanese philosophy, depth psychology, and the stories of people and concepts that have the power to change the way you think and live. You're sure to learn something valuable from any of them. Thank you for staying until the end. It means a lot to me, and remember, be present. Walk with honor, follow the path. See you in the next video.